Says it's preparing,
Yeah, sounds better.
setting up your meeting for YouTube Live. Yeah, I think it's going to work this time.
And then just put in Frank and whatever, and what tonight's topic is still, I forget.
Okay. Oh, but now it's showing. Oh, there we go. Okay. I think we're good to go.
Yeah, it's working, because I get a message on the screen says it's being sent to a third party. I think we're good.
Okay. And yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Whenever you're ready, Frank.
Wonderful. All right. Good evening, everyone. Wonderful cold night. So we've been plowing through, literally, the Tibetan tradition of mental development, Geshe Ngawang Dhargyey. This was, he's now passed away, but this is a book that came out, the Tibetans put out very early. Let me see. Yeah, 1974. And it's kind of like a skeleton of the path. It has, these kind of basic terms that we're not necessarily familiar with, but are so helpful in giving us a mental structure. And why? Because this mental structure is helpful. Excuse me. It allows us first to start to see the interdependence. I mean, you think of the Buddha of coming to a state of omniscience. I mean, full enlightenment. We have in the translations are not in our morning prayers, for instance. The translations are not, they're not like random or poetic translations. Rather, they're every word has meaning. And sometimes for reasons of euphony, it's they're edited in a way. But for instance, when it talks about, I can't remember what the English phrase is, complete something vast. I can't remember. In Sanskrit, it's Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. That's what we're trying to realize. Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, the enlightenment that's beyond enlightenment, basically. So think of the Buddha with that kind, and how do you communicate to others? And then because he saw how completely covered with dust our eyes are. And yet everything appears as real. So there's this like conviction rather than the openness, the questioning, really the profound, you might say, actually scientific attitude, one that is questioning and wanting to know, not kind of resting where you are, never completely satisfied. So out of that came, this, like they say, the 84,000 heaps of Dharma, because it's such a vast problem and beings are deluded in so many ways and the illusion is so powerful. So he started out, I think, so interestingly, with just the fact of suffering. And it's a measure because right there you see, first of all, the fact that he hesitated to teach has always been so completely faith building in me, confidence building in me, rather than the kind of, it's like everybody in the world is trying to sell you something. And sometimes the idea that we have faith in the West, what we think of as religious faith, is like just kind of like a total clinging to something that you don't really know or can't believe. So it's an incredible kind of stubbornness is people see as like, being really strong faith. But of course, that's not the Buddhist idea. For one, it's based on Buddha's realization itself. So all of these teachings are his realization, but expressed in forms that are skillful. So starting out with the fact of suffering is so remarkable because the more you think about it, first of all, how universal it is. You don't run into anybody who doesn't have an issue with suffering, whether human or non-human. So one, everybody's sort of in touch with the same thing. What do we all share? Well, suffering, wanting to be free from suffering, chasing away from running away from suffering, all the different methods that we've come up with to somehow deal with suffering. So immediately there's a universal appeal. Immediately it has nothing to do with all the discriminations and the differences amongst people, culture, nations, forms of life, everything. So profound. And it's also at the basis of our practice and where we kind of go off. When you're taking refuge, for instance, when we're taking refuge in the Dharma starts with that fact of suffering. And you can see in your own, when you're aware of this, you can see in your own behaviors, we're always trying to seek kind of like a false refuge. And once we start understanding how impermanent even these false refuges are, then it's not that you still don't see it and even work for it, but you don't have this absolute blind faith in that some temporary refuge is going to be an absolute refuge. So we're starting to see things as they actually are. So there you go, the first noble truth of suffering. The universality of suffering. And then, of course, the second truth, which is the cause of suffering. So once we have under our belt, all right, there's suffering. Of course, we want to do something. What are the causes of it? Buddhism teaches cause and effect. It's really remarkable. One teacher once said that the entirety of Buddhism is just simply cause and effect and emptiness. They're really the same thing, but seen from different perspectives. Emptiness from a extremely intelligent and also enlightened, realized perspective. And cause and effect is also from, depending on the mindset, from a conventional attitude, but also from an enlightened perspective too. There's just one Dharma. So the divisions that are made in it are simply for skillful purposes. The Buddha gave different answers to the same question to different people, depending on what would be helpful to them. And so it goes. But nonetheless, the cause of suffering. And then the third noble truth, the detail of this chapter is often shocking to people because, generally, thank you. Generally, we think of the Four Noble Truths and it's kind of like 4 sentences and we're kind of done with it, right? But here he has page after page, the details of the kinds of secondary mindset, the primal minds, and then the secondary mindsets. What are the reactions? To give you an idea how we're causing suffering again and again and again. So then the third, now we start getting into a little bit more hopeful, right? The cessation of suffering, nirodha in Sanskrit. You can say that the first 2 noble truths are themselves kleshas. They are themselves, you might say, poisons emotionally. So suffering itself, right, is a klesha, is an obstacle. And the causes, of course, are too. But the last two noble truths are equivalent to nirvana and the path to attain it. So the third truth is the fact of there is a cessation to suffering. And then finally, the fourth noble truth, the path by which the cessation is attained or realized. The fruit of the cessation of suffering is peace, jiwa in Tibet, peace, and never-ending joy. To attain this cessation, we need to cut the fetters of the kleshas. Having done so, there's no possibility of falling back into suffering. Most people, however, do not have patience in applying the methods of escaping from the jail of samsara. Recognizing that one has no worse enemies than one's own kleshas, one's own poisons. The truly brave person conquers the 6 roots and the 22nd dairy kleshas, becoming an arhat, means one who overcomes enemies. There are 2 kinds of obstacles. The first, klesha varanas, includes the 26 and minor kleshas, which must be eliminated before arhatship or nirvana can be attained. The second obstacle, jnana varana, is the instinct of clinging to the illusion of independent self-existence, and is this which blocks the way to the full enlightenment of Buddhahood. So, if we can eliminate our kleshas, these afflictions, that which afflicts the mind, these poisonous kind of mindsets out of which negative karma is generated. If we can get rid of all of that, this is the state of an arhat, one who has conquered all the enemies. Because Buddhism holds that our true enemies are not what we're projecting out there. Their true enemies are our own kleshas. And so we immediately have a field in which we can work and be productive no matter what the situation is. It just changes one's attitude so much. Instead of, as one English poet said, alone and afraid in a world I never made. Instead, it has this inward look. This teaching that mind is the king just changes everything. Once you realize that, even intellectually, we fall out of the understanding of it again and again and again, and we're acting out of our wrong view that we've had for lifetimes. But nonetheless, once you know mind is king, then you can work on the mind. It said that the mind is king, that the speech is like the minister of the king, and the body is like the servant of the king. It just follows around. So this practice of mind also simplifies everything, because then you get these teachings like karma and emptiness. Suddenly the simplicity of what we're doing here, everything else is sort of filling in the blanks or articulating that understanding. Garinpoche has said that the whole practice of the Mahayana is just the compassion is just simply training yourself to see every other sentient being as having been your mother in a previous lifetime. And then wisdom is just seeing all of this as being dreamlike. Those 2 things, it becomes simple. So that's what what the Geshe is talking about here when he's talking about these 2 kinds of obstacles. One are the obstacles of the kleshas, the afflictions, and the removal of them is arhatship, nirvana. But then the second one is the avaranas, the obstacles of knowledge, of jnana. I can't say it in Sanskrit right, but jnana. That's the habit. What does he say? The instinct of clinging to the illusion of independent self-existence. So it's taught that these kleshas are so powerful. but they establish a habit by us acting out of our kleshas lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. Kind of like biological truth, it's a limited kind of understanding. Evolution itself. What's the motive? The motive is just the continuation of the genes. And so instead of seeing all of the world, we've evolved to see just this slice that, helps us or harms us. It's very interesting in that. So we have this limited view that we're practicing again and again and again and again. And so we develop a habit. The habit is the instinct of acting out of the kleshas. And of course, that gives a reality to it. We do it again and again and again. It becomes real to us. So these are the differences. When the obscurations of knowledge are purified, that is Buddhahood. And when you compare the two, it's said that if you were to do like light being wisdom, the light of an arhat is said to be like the glow of a firefly. But the light of a Buddha is said to be like the sun at high noon on a clear day in the summertime. So tremendous power. Buddhahood is way beyond arhatship, you might say. But nonetheless, arhatship is pretty high. It's said that an arhat can walk through a solid wall because they have an understanding of the dreamlike nature of outer appearances. But the Buddha is completely dissolving the inner motivation, also the inner, again, instinct. And of course, that's what's so tough, because instinct is instinct. My goodness. Okay. And then, of course, the fourth noble truth, the path to cessation. There are two goals towards which those on the path strive. The first, nirvana, or moksha, is the attainment of the level of arhatship. And the second, full enlightenment, meaning the all-knowing state, is the attainment of Buddhahood. In order to attain these goals, we need the following. First is the path. It is such a blessing, just knowledge of the path. You see so many people kind of banging around. Everybody wants to be free of suffering, even unconsciously. And there are different degrees of awareness of the situation, of course. But there's such a trying to find methods and things that'll work. And even to be able to accept intellectually that there is a path is so helpful, because suddenly the mind has some directionality to it, some focus, which of course is meditation, mindfulness on the object of, instead of just the mind being scattered. It's said that the focused mind is like, starting to start a fire. Normally the light rays are just disperse and there's light there, but there's not really much heat. But if you have a magnifying glass, you can focus those various rays of the light and actually create a spark, which is wisdom. So the path, in order to attain the goals, arhatship and then Buddhahood, we need the following: a path. Second, awareness of the path is the means of counteracting the kleshas, because we're in such a rich situation in that our kleshas are arising all the time. I mean, we've nurtured them for lifetimes, and it seems completely natural. And of course, it's something beyond our conscious control. They just come up and they're just there. But with this knowledge of the path, we have rigpa, which is awareness of the path. And then again, when the kleshas arise, they suddenly become the things that we work with, rather than just being something that are afflicting us, the afflictions. So the path, awareness of the path, practice of these means. With exertion and endurance, motivated by the wish to attain a high state of existence. So we have the path, we have awareness of the path, and now we have practice. And then finally, knowledge of the method to eliminate the kleshas so they will never again return. We know what to apply in our practice. All right, so he gives a summary then. If you have the book, I'm on page 26 and 27. He said 16 incorrect views concerning the Four Noble Truths. So this is the very sutric form, the very conventional teachings on the Four Noble Truths. This other book that we once did in the study group, the Moonbeams of Mahamudra, goes into the Four Noble Truths too, slightly different, attitude. And this is the richness of the Dharma too. You start seeing that it's just, again, one Dharma, but presented in different ways because we at different times are open or can understand different presentations. But you will see with this, why is this important here? Like say with this Dharma Center, we present the full range of the teachings to the best that we can. But the importance of sort of representing and respecting a lineage is not a sectarian thing at all. But you're presenting the full range because you don't know what's going to work for anybody. But it's kind of like the physician's desk reference for medicines, for drugs. You've got the full range of stuff. You might come across some dis-ease that you've never experienced before, but there might be something in there that works for that particular thing, for that particular moment. Again, we're so complex as human beings. So this is doing now a summary of the 16 incorrect views concerning the Four Noble Truths. So again, 4 wrong views concerning suffering and the body, all right? Thinking of the body as being clean and pure, that's a wrong view. Thinking of the body as being a source of pleasure. Sometimes I think that Western civilization, not civilization, but our modern Western existence is based on that, body as being a source of pleasure. Thinking that the body has a permanent aspect. Thinking that the body is composed of solid, independent matter. That's the wrong views concerning suffering in the body. Then 4 wrong views concerning the cause of suffering. So the cause of suffering now. Believing that suffering has no cause or is its own cause. Second is thinking that suffering arises from irrelevant causes. Third, holding the view that suffering is due only to one cause, independent of conditions or secondary circumstances. So this is the richness also of Buddhism and its analysis, because it's not just your karma, what you have set in forth, this potentiality, you might say, in the mind to suffer or experience pleasure, but nonetheless, this potentiality of karma. But there are also the secondary conditions. And this is extremely important. If you think, you have to have a seed, right? That's the karma. You have to have a seed. Otherwise, there's no potential. But the seed in itself is not enough. You have to have soil. You have to have warmth. You have to have water. All these secondary conditions. We spend so much time, and the teaching actually is that it's these secondary conditions arising that allow the inherent karma to manifest. We spend so much time, because of our limited view and seeing things just on the surface and all these wrong views that we have of the body, of our mind, speech, everything. So when, for instance, great anger arises, we are always looking outer, right? And we're always trying to manage or attack the secondary conditions, the secondary characteristics, you might say, the contributing conditions. But we're not dealing with the source. This is the great power of the Dharma. You're dealing with the source. It's said that if you throw a stone at a dog or a stick at a dog, the dog will chase the stick. But if you throw a stone or a stick at a lion, the lion will go for you. Will ignore the stick and go for you. It's dealing with the cause. So it's like each one of us, when I think of anger, each one of us is like we have a lake of gasoline in our hearts, and we're going to run into someone with a match, and we're blaming the match all the time. The match is a contributing condition, no doubt about it. But if you want to get to the cause, you have to deal with that lake of gasoline, endlessly blaming the cause or the person who has the match, all of that, limited things there. But in terms of fundamental, what you can really do and what Buddhism offers. And finally, the four wrong views concerning the cause of suffering: believing suffering has no cause or is its own cause, thinking that suffering arises from irrelevant causes, holding the view that suffering is due to only one cause, independent of conditions or secondary circumstances, and fourth, believing that suffering and its causes are permanent. Next is the four wrong views concerning the cessation of suffering. So the third noble truth, Nirodha, the cessation of suffering. What are the four wrong views concerning that? Doubting that there is any liberation from suffering. And certainly there are many people that feel this way. They sit down and think about it. Even highfalutin philosophers can come to this kind of conclusion. So doubting that
Hey, Zoomers, are you there? See.
Hi there.
Hi, sorry about that. Our computer just shut
Yeah.
down. So
Okay, I can hear you now.
Yeah, we're back.
great. Wonderful. Thank you for your patience. And Frank will go back a couple steps to the final wrong views.
Wrong views
Thanks for coming together.
concerning the path. I think that's where we were. Again, believing there's no path which can be followed. That's a wrong view. Believing that there's no way to perceive egolessness. You can see how it's that wrong view is based on giving kind of like an absolute truth to ego, to this alienated self. Everything is only, can be perceived through that. So believing there's no way to perceive egolessness, like we're just sort of damned. Then next wrong view, practicing methods which yield no fruit. There's certainly a lot of that in the world. And then believing that there are no effective remedies for one's suffering, kind of a hopelessness. So what's interesting to me is that the teachings in the Dharma start off with completion. I mean, it starts with the Four Noble Truths. And they kind of permeate everything throughout the path. But you see right from the beginning, here's the whole path that's presented to you. And now the rest is like uncovering it and the necessary steps and the concepts that lead us in the right direction. That's a wonderful thing. And the profundity of each one of these, we slowly realize more and more, deeper and deeper. There's one story in the Pali Suttas of, I believe it was Ananda asking the Buddha, he was going to ask some question. You've probably heard me give this story before, but he was going to ask some question that was on his mind to the Buddha. And he was prefacing it by saying, well, now I know there's the first noble truth of suffering, but how about, and the Buddha stopped him. And he gave one of these typically Indian kind of examples of how many eons it takes to fully realize the import of the first noble truth. So it's always, this open mind, this, like it said, never being satisfied with some level of attainment, which can be a wonderful thing, but it's not a place to stop. So this understanding and recognition of the Four Noble Truths, these are oral teachings the Geshe Dhargyey gave in Dharamsala, and then his students put it into the book. I think they probably taped him and then typed all these things out. It's an amazing amount of material, but it leads to teaching on the fully endowed human body. If one has obtained the precious, fully endowed human body, one has the opportunity to attain the cessation of suffering. Thus, it is of the greatest importance to recognize this body and its diamond-like value. The attributes which comprise a fully endowed body include the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments. So he's going to get into those. But first, this understanding of the fully endowed human body, it changes one's attitude. Somewhere in his teachings on this, Jigten Sumgön, sorry, I'm confusing this with the gratitude to a mother. But with these freedoms and endowments, the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments, you can go through them and you can see yourself. Do I have this? Do I have this freedom? Do I have this endowment? And so no matter how mean or tragic or difficult your situation is, you still have this understanding that I have this vehicle, this most opportune situation by which to realize my nature. I don't know if he's going to talk about this in this chapter, probably. But it's said that the human body has the the again, the fully endowed human body has, excuse me, the enough leisure that we can work on our mind, and yet there's enough dissatisfaction or awareness of dissatisfaction that we're motivated to do so. It's said in the higher realms, the higher sensual realms, the godlike realms, that the pleasure is just kind of distracting. There's the nature of suffering, but you don't really realize the existence even of the suffering until the end of one's deva-like existence. So although it said the Buddha was the teacher of gods and men, although you can come to enlightenment as a deva, it's not as opportune situation as a human being. In the lower realms, animals, hungry ghosts, hellish beings, there's so little leisure, and the suffering can be overwhelming, that it's just not conducive. So this fully endowed human body, first, just to tick them off, the 8 freedoms. 4 freedoms from fetters within human existence. So what's one freedom? It's a freedom from firmly holding wrong views, such as nihilism or disbelief in the law of cause and effect. You just can't believe it, and you're just clinging firmly to disbelief. Now, this doesn't mean that someone is convinced of all of these things necessarily, but the mind is open. It's like, if you want to learn a skill or something, you find someone who knows what they're doing, and you don't have any of that skill, but you have confidence that you can develop that skill, and you're open to learning. So firmly holding wrong views, not holding firmly wrong view, such as nihilism, is one of the freedom. And then not having birth in a totally non-religious or barbaric land. So that's a place where you just can't come across the teachings of the Dharma. There may be, partial benefits there. This is not an out and out condemnation of other cultures, other situations, whatever. But to come to Buddhahood, someone like Milarepa or Buddha Shakyamuni or Guru Rinpoche, you need to have these 8 freedoms. All right, then you're free. You were not born in a land where no Buddhist Dharma is taught, and you're not born with severely limited faculties. Traditionally, they say mute, but that isn't necessarily true anymore. But it means that if you're in a very, very I don't know, like an aggravated mental state, or really, really severe retardation in that. So you want to have full faculties. So those are the 4 freedoms. There are freedoms and fetters within human existence. And then there are 4 freedoms from non-human types of birth. So you don't want to be born in the hell region of continuous suffering. You don't want to be born in the hungry gross realm with continual hunger and desire, prevent any practice of the Dharma. You don't want to be birthed as an animal, lacking the power to discriminate between virtuous and non-virtuous actions. And you don't want birth as a long life deva with so much pleasure that one has no motivation to practice the Dharma. So those are the 8 freedoms, some within humans, some the non-human. Interestingly, I'm always kind of get a kick out of, our own, in that English is an Indo-European language, going all the way back to Sanskrit as a major kind of root influence. I just think it's kind of interesting because this word deva, we call someone a diva, right? Someone who is like, I always think of a female opera singer as being a diva, with this amazing kind of talent, but also this amazing kind of arrogance and snobbishness. But deva, yeah. So those are the 8 freedoms. And then what are the 10 endowments? And so again, you can tick through all these things and see, no, I don't have that. I don't have that. I don't have that. Here we go. The 10 endowments, there are 5 personal endowments. Birth as a human being, birth where the Dharma flourishes, birth with a body having all 5 senses intact, birth into a life free from the 5 heinous crimes, which are killing one's father, killing one's mother, killing an arhat, purposely shedding the blood of a Buddha, and causing a schism in the Sangha. So those are said to be the heinous crimes. And you don't want to be involved in those. It just creates such a karmic obstacle. And then also the 5th of these endowments, the personal endowments, is having respect for the Tripitaka, the 3 baskets of the Dharma, the Vinaya, the moral discipline, the sutras, the discourses, and the Abhidharma, the wisdom teachings of the Buddha. Okay. The 5 endowments, personal endowments. And then there are 5 circumstantial endowments. Presence of a Buddha during the time in which one lives. So in other words, we are aware that we're in an era when the Buddha has appeared. The rarity of this occurrence throughout the ages is very great, like the flash of a lightning on a dark night. So what's the next circumstance? The presence of the Dharma of Lord Buddha. So we can be in a place where the Buddha has the presence of the Buddha, but the presence of the Dharma also. So it's not just the knowledge that was someone called the Buddha, but rather the Dharma is still alive in the time that you're born. The flourishing of the practice of the Dharma. There are 2 kinds of teaching, scriptural and insight, the latter being one's own experience of the Dharma. So we want the time in which the Buddha is remembered, the time in which the Dharma is in existence, and a time in which the practice of the Dharma is flourishing to one degree or another. And then 4th, the existence of the monastic order, the fellowship of those who follow the Dharma and guide others towards attainment of enlightenment. So there has to be a Sangha, Buddha Dharma Sangha. And then 5th, being under the care of a compassionate person, a patron or a teacher who looks after one in one's practice. So again, you go through these 18 things, the 8 freedoms, the 10 endowments, and you go, oh my goodness, I have all of them. The effect of this is to have sort of an anchor, you might say, or a fundamental confidence. Because no matter how depressed one is, you can still look and say, oh my goodness, I have these freedoms and endowments. And although I feel like a schlub right now, I know I have these things. And I know I have these things because of my good karma, because of things that I did in the past. There's no mistakes. So it prevents an absolute kind of despair, but it also encourages and inspires one. It allows you to meet the ordinary slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, because nothing, again, is absolute. I mean, you hear all the time, it's just so sad. People run into some difficulty in their life or some even just disappointment. And, people commit suicide for all sorts of reasons. I'm always amazed at, all the crime shows that are out there and you watch, and all these people who are like killing their spouses and sitting in because they don't want to be divorced. And I think it never made sense to me, but, the power of the mind and the negative mind. So all of these things, by coming across them, there's like a little bit of light. And by, this is hearing the Dharma. And then by analyzing, thinking, going over it, testing it with your mind again and again and again, the mind becomes more stable. You might say there's more space in the mind. And then finally, growing accustomed to this, the meditation, to making it your own experience. By the simple abiding in that understanding. And the wonder of this, especially in the Mahayana, is that even the intellectual knowledge of this, you have a concept. This is great. We have a way of relating to reality that's limited, yes, this conceptual mind, but nonetheless can be used. And so we have a concept, and then with the concept comes an understanding, which if you think about it is actually something, it's a quality of mind that's different, separate from just the mere concept that the teacher would write on the blackboard, right? You know, you have this idea of like a precious human body, and you can kind of rest in the sense or the feeling that you get from that. You can't grab onto it. It's non-conceptual there too. But in other words, even our concepts lead us in the right way, especially in the conventional teachings. You know, you do these analysis, this mental analysis that we've had teachings like this here, you know, going through the body and all the things that are done in the 4 foundations of mindfulness and others, but you're using an intellectual process, but you get to the point where you can't go any farther, so to speak. But the mind has been refined. At least you've thrown away all the baloney concepts that are the source of confusion and just dead weeds, so to speak. And you can take a leap, and it's not really a leap. It kind of leads you into it naturally just by following the progression of the practice. And this is why these teachings are so incredibly valuable, because they are the Dharma. But from the perspective of someone who has all sorts of clinging. So, precious human body. Let's see what the Geshe says. He has now a couple of pages talking about it. Having a body, or more accurately, a body-mind, possessing these 8 freedoms and 10 endowments, one is capable of shaping one's own future by following the path leading to higher states of birth and ultimately to full enlightenment. One then has the best circumstances in which to practice virtue and the means towards higher attainment, with the possibility of attaining full enlightenment in one lifetime. Only in this southern continent, which is what they call this existence we're in, do sentient beings have this opportunity. Thus, the fully endowed body should be considered even more valuable than a wish-fulfilling gem. This form is precious in every moment, for each moment may be used for the purpose of approaching enlightenment. Possibilities are boundless. One must first recognize this form, realize its great value and rarity, then use it accordingly for gaining higher attainment. Like the appearance of a flower, these 18 characteristics are the result of causes and conditions, the main 3 of which are maintaining pure moral practice, practicing the 6 perfections, and offering prayers directed towards gaining higher goals than pleasure, goals higher than pleasure in this life. Practice of morality prevents one from falling into the lower realms, and generosity causes prosperity in one's next life. On the other hand, if not even one type of moral practice is kept purely, there's no chance of future human rebirth in the next life. So one must abstain from the following 10 non-virtuous acts: killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, causing dissension among others by means of slander, abuse, idle, or senseless speech, the least of the non-virtues, but the easiest way to waste one's life, craving the possessions of others, thoughts of harming others, and holding wrong views. These 10 form the basis for all further practice, including the Tantra. Path of enlightenment is one of different stages to be taken a step at a time. Although it is difficult at first to practice virtue because of one's instincts, one must develop the attitude to be willing to undergo any hardship on the path, not expecting an easy way. Being endowed with a fully endowed human body is like having pushed an iron ball halfway up a mountain. If one relaxes, ignoring this opportunity, it will naturally roll down again. The future lies in one's own hands. These teachings on the precious human body always include first just the recognition of it that we just talked about, but then contemplation on it. What does this mean? Certainly the recognition of the 8 freedoms and 10 endowments, but then contemplation of the great value of the fully endowed body. Contemplation of the rarity of attaining a fully endowed body. The difficulty of obtaining the human form is illustrated by this example. The classic example is a vast ocean in which a golden yoke drifts about, moved by the wind and the currents. Once every 100 years, a blind turtle surfaces for a moment, then again submerges. The chances of the turtle surfacing with its head inside the yoke are likened to those of obtaining a fully endowed human body. In this example, the golden yoke symbolizes the Buddha Dharma, and its motion refers to the fact that the Dharma moves from one land to another according to the needs of people. The turtle's blindness symbolizes the inability of creatures in the lower realms to discriminate between virtue and non-virtue. Its existence beneath the ocean's surface represents one existence in the lower realms, and its surfacing, the attainment of human rebirth. So the rarity, and then also the nature of scarcity in terms of numbers. The number of beings endowed with a fully endowed bodies are compared with the number of all sentient beings. It's like a handful of dust compared with the dust of the world. Of the 6 realms, the hells contain by far the greatest number of beings. Each of the higher realms contain progressively fewer. Moreover, within the human realm, the number of those with the fully endowed bodies is small in proportion to the entire human population. Between the time periods during which the teachings of each of the 1,000 universal teachers of the world, Shakyamuni is the 4th. So there's this teaching that there are 1,000 Buddhas will appear, and Shakyamuni is the 4th. Between time periods when there is a universal teacher, there comes a minor dark age. The major dark age comes after the teaching of the 1,000th Buddha, who, in this particular cycle of 1,000 Buddhas, will be a manifestation of Vajrapani. During each of these dark ages, the Dharma totally dies out. Before the coming of the next universal teacher, Maitreya, the 5th Buddha of this world age, the average lifespan will decrease to 10 years, then slowly increase to 80,000 years. During these dark ages, people will not be able to benefit from the Dharma, even if it exists, for they would be far too immersed in delusion. Although there have been many since the time of Shakyamuni who have attained full enlightenment, that which distinguishes a universal teacher is the promise to deliver all sentient beings from the misery of samsara. Having been endowed with a fully endowed body, one has the opportunity to attain full enlightenment in this life, or failing that, nirvana, or at least a higher state of existence. It's said that the refuge vow, if maintained, closes the door to lower rebirths. So there is tremendous benefit to merely taking refuge. In his teachings, in the winter teachings that I was listening to Ngawang Rinpoche gave, Megan was translating. It was remarkable to me because he was teaching on the 5-fold path of Mahamudra. And, he started off with these high Mahamudra kind of teachings, but then, remarkable, he just kept sort of coming down, so to speak. And in the end, he was presenting the entire Dharma in this teaching of Mahamudra. And there's no contradiction in that. But finally, in the end, he was saying, say you don't have any time to meditate. You don't have any time to practice. He said, well, then you can eat this little pill, liberation by taste. Or you can wear this, a gao, liberation by wearing, or liberation, all these different things. In other words, there's no obstacles to Dharma. Our obstacles are just our mental belief that there are obstacles. It's that profound. But of course, that's a very high state of faith. But there he was giving it to us. He makes it all possible. If none of these are attained, higher state of existence at least, one's fully endowed body has been wasted. The level of one's attainment depends largely upon one's mental scope and motivation. The person of highest scope strives after full enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. One of medium scope strives after nirvana, or freedom from suffering. The main aspect of one's practice being perfect renunciation of all samsaric existence. The person of small scope, due to a fear of rebirth in the lower realms, strives after a higher state of birth in the next. The three types of practice corresponding to each type of person are graded, not contradictory, making the path to Buddhahood realizable. The main subjects of contemplation for the person of small scope are impermanence, the qualities of the three refuges, and the law of cause and effect. The most important teaching for one of medium scope, seeking their own freedom, is the Four Noble Truths. The distinguishing practices of the person of the highest scope are those of the Bodhisattva path and those contained in the Tatrayana. The so-called common path, namely that followed by persons of the two lower scopes, is the basis for all practice. Each of the progressively higher practices stem from and have its foundation in the practices of the persons of small scope, karma. The primary difference between a religious and a non-religious person is the level of attachment to this life. While most people spend their lives striving after worldly satisfaction and reward, if one contemplates one's own future existence, a sense of renunciation of these sources of pleasures will grow. Contemplation of the suffering of all states of existence, and especially awareness of death and impermanence, bring about a great increase in one's exertion of effort in practicing the Dharma. Death awareness is the great motivator and intensifier, and there can be no good practice without it. Having this awareness, one sees that there's no time to postpone one's practice. One great Lama, at the age of 60, when asked to write his autobiography, replied, "I passed 20 years of not appreciating the Dharma, then 20 years of procrastinating, and another 20 years of apologizing for not practicing Dharma." This is the autobiography of an empty life. We always feel there is plenty of time for the practice of the Dharma, but our time is running out. We need to recognize the importance of abandoning attachment to this life, practicing the Dharma purely, without mixing it with the 8 worldly dharmas. So I'll go through the 8 worldly dharmas, and then we can conclude for tonight. It is these 8 which are to be renounced in the practice of Dharma. So what's the 8 worldly dharmas? Pleasure derived from gaining something. Can you imagine? You gain something and the pleasure. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't experience the pleasure. This is not some sort of Calvinism, but rather, if your whole motivation is getting that pleasure and you're actually denigrating the accomplishment itself. So the pleasure comes with it naturally, no problem. The other worldly dharma is displeasure at not obtaining an object of desire. My goodness, people don't get what they want. And truly, they're just devastated. Happiness caused by worldly pleasures, sadness caused by displeasure, pleasure at being praised, displeasure at being abused or degraded, pleasures from hearing pleasing words or information about relatives, friends, and so forth, and displeasure from hearing unpleasant words. Now, I used to know these. The 8 worldly dharmas used to be praise and blame, gain and loss, fame and shame, and I can't remember the last 2. It was a little bit of a poetic kind of thing there. If we recognize the samsaric nature of the 8 worldly dharmas and renounce them totally, we can attain a state of peace and equanimity. As a means of attaining this complete renunciation, we may well follow the practice of the 10 innermost jewels of the Kadam tradition, which are found in Kadam Torbu. I shouldn't do it in Tibetan, which is a collection of sayings of this tradition. So we'll start there next time. The most jewels, 10 of the Kadam. The Kadampas are the followers of the Kadam. Is the tradition that was started by Atisha coming to Tibet. So Tibetan history is a very wonderful thing and actually very supportive, of our practice, because you see what the Tibetans have gone through and the obstacles that were there, even when you had imperial support, the problems, human beings, samsara. So, as you know, these generally say there are four great traditions in Tibet lineages: the Nyingma, the old tradition, and then the three newer tradition, the Geluk, the Kagyu, and the Sakya. The Kadam has been absorbed into the Kagyu, absorbed into the Geluk, and I think the Sakyas too, but I'm not sure. It's these monks, this tradition that was begun, very kind of strict monkish practice that we'll talk about here. But I know we share it with the Geluks, so you have many Kadam. The 37 Bodhisattva practices was composed by Kadampa monk. So it's a very kind of a wonderful kind of example of their mindfulness and insight practice. Okay, so first, any questions? Anybody tonight? Give that man a microphone.
So Frank, am I on? Testing 1, 2, 3. Frank, thank you so much. This is so awesome. But I love. It's interesting. So the what I read was we're in the age of 100 and we're going down to 10 again. So and I thought that was total BS until I actually read, because I'm crazy, and thank you for getting me off my intellectualisms. But before I stopped, I looked into it. There was actually a little girl in the South America that was actually pregnant, gave birth at 5.5.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So it totally can happen that we live to be 10. Yeah. So it's very impressive.
Wow.
But oh man, I was going to ask you something. Have you, are there any more, is it below 10? Is it like, how long does that last? How long do these ages last for? Did you ever read anything about that, Frank?
I don't know.
Oh,
I don't know.
okay. I was just wondering.
And all those things are kind of, what strikes me often is these teachings are so mind-boggling in the sense that we, from our current standpoint, we just can't accept it. It just seems to violate reality.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That's why I love Kempo is always having us do the aspiration of Samanta Bahadra. I mean, it's just so remarkable when they talk about an infinity of Buddhas on a grain of dust, a speck of dust, and then an infinite amount of bodhisattvas are on each one of those Buddhas. It's just so mind-boggling. But how do you express it? To me, it makes such perfect sense that the Buddha hesitated to teach. So when I know that, then when I hear these things that seem kind of hard to believe, well, at the very least, it gives you, the feeling of vastness and the feeling of the openness of your mind that maybe there's something I don't see. So instead of putting everything through my, temporary human perspective and making that the standard of truth, you realize it's much vaster than that. And you can see that in the Pali Suttas too, because it's like I often say, you can smell the dust of India in all the Theravada. They've preserved all of these. Originally, I think there were like 17 different schools. The Theravada is just the one surviving one, where the sutras are all about, the Buddha is just like human being. I mean, he talked to this person and got into dispute with this person, and this person asked this question. You can see it. It's just like on human level. But then with the Mahayana sutras, it immediately blows your mind. And because what the Buddha was teaching on Vulture Peak, and he was surrounded by 100,000 monks and nuns, and this many devas, and then you go to Vulture Peak, and it's just this little place. So right away, you've got a question going on. This is really very, very wonderful. Someone said, well, once, we think in our modern kind of nihilistic, materialistic age that myths are fables, not true. But the thing is that there are truths that are too big to be expressed in strictly scientific kind of terms. And these days, if you really get into the depths of the science and start studying black holes, and it's all totally mind-boggling. Gravity waves. It's just all this stuff that in quantum. So once you want to hold on to our ordinary view of things, even in a materialistic way, that doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, it's scientism that takes all the fun out of it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's actually destructive of science.
I love air conditioning.
Yeah, right. Scientism, the attachment to, is not it. Is not it.
Another question I had was, it seemed to be okay. So you said there were going to be 1,000 Buddhas. Shakyamuni's in number 4th. Maitreya is number 5. Is that correct, or is he going to be the first one of the next 1,000? It seemed like okay.
He's number 5.
Okay.
He's the next one.
Okay.
Yeah. Lama Govinda's teacher practiced Maitreya.
Very cool.
Went all around northern India, Nepal, Tibet, teaching Maitreya.
Wow.
Okay.
Thank you, Frank.
Okay. We dedicate the merit this evening to all motherly sentient beings, each and every last one. May we not rest until every last one is free, and in freeing them, may we free ourselves. Swaha. Okay. Okay. And thank you, Zoomers. Our cold and frosty night.
Yeah. Thank you, Frank.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Good night.
Thank you, Eileen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Yeah. All right.
We should take an updated picture, right?
Right. Right. It's mind-boggling. I'll have to find it. There's this wonderful passage from Pascal, Blaise Pascal. Oh, he was like in the late 1600s, I think. Yeah, and truly amazing. And he does this sort of like this guided meditation into going into the space, bigger space. But then he does also going smaller. And I think what's